Hey guys, it's Dib here to talk about DPS log analysis. Unlike the healers and the tanks, DPS analysis is more straightforward, let's say. You can definitely boil a lot of it down to math. There's a couple tips and tricks that we'll look at to kind of show who's doing the fight mechanics and that kind of thing. And we'll also look at how to compare yourself to other players to see what they're doing, as well as kind of how you can figure out what Azurite powers, talents, and trinkets you could be using for each fight to get the most out of your DPS. So let's start off with a log. This log is Gahun Heroic, and it was an alt run in my other guild. So you can see I am dead last in DPS, not a good place to be. But let's go ahead and copy paste into WoW Analyzer and see what I could be doing better. Okay, lots of things to work on here. Always be casting. This is the biggest thing for any DPS. There's going to be downtime in a fight sometimes, like if I was running an orb, which I did do during the first intermission in Gahun, there's nothing to hit. In fact, you shouldn't be hitting the ads because they're just dying. So you're going to have downtime. You're not going to have 35% downtime though. So a lot of this is, positioning. I think in phase 3 I had really bad positioning and was kind of running around trying not to die, which, trying not to die is your first priority, especially in a phase 3 of Gahun, but you should be able not to die and to keep DPSing. So this is like the number one thing almost for any DPS, is always be casting. You got to have very small downtimes. And like downtime, using your core abilities as often as possible. Make sure you keep everything on cooldown. Judgment was a little bit better, but Blade of Justice and Crusader Strike needs to be used more often as well. And that goes into always be casting. Like if you're always casting, but you're casting the wrong abilities, that could be a problem for some classes. Using cooldowns. So I don't keep Avenging Wrath on cooldown or Wake of Ashes on cooldown. We'll take a little look at this. This fight does have a priority damage phase, which is the second intermission, the second re-origination beam. Gahun is taking a ton of extra damage, so we can kind of look at, maybe I held Avenging Wrath for that. Maybe I even held Wake of Ashes for that, just to make sure I used them during that phase, and that's why I didn't have 100% uptime. But generally, you want 100% on both of these. Using procs and buffs efficiently, I'm not going to go into this. This is going to be different for every class, but you want to have high uptime in your debuffs. You want to consume your procs. You want to generate your procs properly. Using Holy Power efficiently, this is the resource for the Rep Paladin, and I actually did do a good job of using my resource properly. You never want to overcap your resources. Well, not never, but for a Holy Paladin, you never want to recap. Some classes, every class is different for all this stuff, but in general, you want to use the most of your resources possible. Be well prepared. So I did not use a pre-pot. I did not use a flask. This is an alt run, so some of this stuff is stuff I should be doing, but just wasn't because it was an alt run. The reason I don't use a pre-pot on this fight is because I was the first orb runner, so by the time I got back into the fight, I wouldn't have gotten any use out of a pre-pot anyway. I did use a second potion though, which we'll see. And then a lot of classes have defensive spells, utility spells they should be using. I did use, I could have used Shield of Vengeance more to protect myself from damage, but when I did use it, I used it effectively and it consumed the entire shield. Lay on hands, I used it, so that was good. And then down here, there's going to be all kinds of statistics. They can show what your Azerite powers were doing for you, what your trinket did in terms of damage. All this kind of stuff can be helpful. And again, it's going to be different for every class, but always be casting is extremely important and probably the thing that people have trouble doing most often. And it's probably the easiest place to improve. Just make sure you're always using an ability, always have your cast bar going, or always having the global cooldown rolling. So with this in mind, let's go back to the log and take a look. The first thing under damage done that you can do to kind of get an idea what's going on is you can look at like a priority add and who did damage to it. So the first Gibbering Horror has to be killed. So let's see what that was. So I had really bad damage on that. That's just terrible. And in fact, the damage I did do, Wake of Ashes, Laser Matrix, and an Azerite trait, those are all just kind of incidental damage. I never actually targeted the Gibbering Horror. I just kind of accidentally did some damage to it along the way. So that's very bad. Our ranged pick up the heavy lifting, especially this Hunter, does tremendous damage to the Gibbering Horror, and he's the one who actually kills it. So this would be like a fail. You gotta get on the priority target, make sure it's dead. So we'll uncheck that, so we're seeing all enemies again. The other thing you can check is like, in any given fight, you know, who did the most damage, but then who did the most damage to the boss is usually important. So if you filter it by that, I actually did better. Definitely not in this top tier, but maybe in the middle tier of damage to the boss. And the reason for that is during the first phase, you've got the Blight Spreader Tendril, you've got the Cyclopean Terrors. My damage isn't very high on these. These are not like priority adds. They're the only thing you can kill, so it, you know, you should be on them, of course, but you're not going to win the fight in phase 1 by downing the Cyclopean Terrors more quickly. You got to kill the boss. You got to kill the priority ad. Those are the things you should be looking for as a DPS, making sure your damage is high on the important things. So the other thing we can look at is right here. We can look at the damage done. And this is where I actually do a lot better. I'm not as good as Joshi, who is absolutely blowing up the high damage phase where we pop hero and the boss takes increased damage until we push the phase. But I do a good job here. Despite all my other shortcomings in this fight, I make sure that I am unloading on the boss during this point. And you can see the other Ret Paladin does not do as good of a job at all. He's towards the bottom, even though he's a much better player than I am. He did not do the right thing here. So we can kind of take a look at why that happened, and we'll go to the compare tool. We'll select Astralist and Dib and just compare what we were doing. So why did I do so much damage here? Let's look at damage done. So looking this over, he has more cast than I do. He has 12 big hitting abilities. I only have 10. But he's doing 37k on average, and I'm doing 73k on average, which is a crazy difference. Likewise, he has more judgments. He has this, well, the same Blade of Justice, one less Crusader. We both cast Wake of Ashes, but as you can see, all my abilities are hitting way harder. Now I got kind of lucky I have a crit on Wake of Ashes, whereas he did not. I have a high crit on Templar's Verdict. He just didn't get lucky. Some of that's luck. So there will be variance there, but let's take a look here at what we're casting. So Avenging Wrath. Astralist did not use Avenging Wrath during this point, so he didn't have his cooldown up. He also didn't use a pot, and that's most of the difference right there. It's just lining up a cooldown with a pot on this phase makes a massive difference in the damage done. That's not quite 50%. Well, maybe 50% more, which is, it's ridiculous for the same period of time. The other thing you can do is kind of look at, you can break it down into like phases, who did the most damage in each phase. So we both ran orbs in phase 1. I actually did a little more damage here than he did, which is strange. But his orb run was harder than mine. He was second or third, whereas I got to go first and rejoin the fight pretty quickly. I can look at the middle phase. Here I'm a little bit behind, despite being way ahead on the burn phase. So he's just playing a lot better than I am here, and probably has a little bit better gear as well. Third phase, he is doing 50% more damage than I am, which is big. He's casting a lot more spells, doing a lot more damage. His positioning is a lot better, and you know, he just has that uptime on the boss in phase 3 that you're going to want. The other thing we could look at is when, I'll take that off. So Astralist and Dib, we both used Avenging Wrath 3 times. He pops it on the pool. Pops it again when the boss comes out, probably. And then he chooses, he sees that the boss is about to phase right around this 4-minute mark when his Avenging Wrath comes up, and he just kind of says, nah, I'm not going to use it. I'm going to wait until after the collapse and the boss can take damage again. So we both get 1 in phase 3. And we both get 1 in phase 1. And we both get 1 in phase 2, essentially. I think that's correct. Yep. So the other reason, he's popping off the pool because he does not have to, you know, run up again. Or he's on the bottom already. I'm up getting ready to run an orb, so I wait until I come back down and have the buff from the Dark Young available. Once I get that buff, I pop Avenging Wrath and go to town. So you can see here, though, my Avenging Wrath would have become available right about here at the 3-minute mark. But I know pretty soon, 45 seconds later, I'm going to want Avenging Wrath for this burn phase. It's probably worth it for Astralist to wait, not cast his Avenging Wrath here, and just wait until... That's a ton of time to wait, but it's probably worth it, because you're getting double damage on the boss for that period. And then you can see again, he would have gotten another one in anyway. So that's a good way to compare if there's someone in your raid. But let's say I was the only rep pally. What you can do is look at other rep pallies. Actually, hold on, before I do that. You can also use this to compare your gear, so the summary. You can look at the stats that people have. So I'm a Holy Paladin taking, trying to play Ret. So I have the crit, a ton of crit from my Holy Paladin gear. And Astralist has a ton of haste. And that's a big difference. A Holy Paladin would prefer haste to crit, but with my gear, I'm not able to get that. The boost from Reorigination Ray is a big deal. We can also see here, he took different talents. He's using Hammer of Wrath. I'm using Blade of Wrath. And then he has Divine Purpose. I have Inquisition. And there's some difference in the traits. We're both using Relentless Inquisitor. We both have a Oldir Raid trait to get the Reorigination Array. Here he does have 10 eye levels on me total, that's significant. And you can also check he has 30 eye levels on his weapon, which is a pretty big difference as well. Weapon damage definitely matters for melee. It can matter for range quite a bit as well. So neither of us died. Blah, blah, blah. Let's go back to compare. Okay. So let's say I was the only Ret Paladin. We can just pick my name, go to damage, and there's a number of variables you can pick here: the length of the fight, the raid size, the item level, and the time range of when the fight occurred. So what we could do is, item level is kind of important. It's not the be all end all anymore. Like, someone with the same item level can have drastically different damage than another just based on which pieces they have. That can always make a big difference. Raid size hardly matters at all for a DPS, so we can bump that up. Fight length can definitely matter. Shorter fights favor DPS for sure. You can have higher percentage uptimes of potions and hero, all that kind of stuff. So being within 10 seconds is pretty reasonable. We'll hit search. And it's going to show us every other parse that fits these criteria that we put in. And they're playing Ret Paladin. So we can look at basically, who the highest damage is probably the person you want to compare yourself to. You can also look at what traits people were using. So some people were using Hammer of Wrath, some people were using Blade of Wrath, some people had Inquisition, some people had Divine Purpose. Oh, some people had Crusade. Let's see. So we'll just pick the first one, see what it is. Okay, this happens a lot. If you can see this is in German probably. So if you pick an EU realm, or if there's Asian characters of some sort or Russian hieroglyphics, whatever these are, you might not be able to read it as well. So let's pick this guy from the US, and we can compare ourselves in English. So we can see under damage done, it's going to show how many times I was able to cast Templar's Verdict against this guy. He cast it more. Melee hits, he was higher. I am hitting slightly harder than he is, but not by a lot. And we can go to summary. He has way higher haste, like he should. And we're actually using the same damage talents here. So Righteous Verdict, Blade of Wrath. This is utility. Wake of Ashes is damage. This is utility. This is utility. And Inquisition is a damage type ability. His Azerite traits are pretty similar. He has an archive. I have a laser matrix for the reordination array. We're both using Relentless Inquisitor, which is good. He has 2 points. I have 1, and I have this kind of scrub trait. And you can see here we have the exact same item level. The big difference here is he does have the 375 weapon. I have a 355. That's not as good. And you want to check, neither of us died, so that's good. Let's check one thing really quick. So we can see here the other difference is I ran an orb, whereas this guy did not. If you look at top parses, often you're going to find that the people who get top parses are not participating in mechanics because their group didn't need them to. It's something to keep in mind, that you're seldom going to be able to catch up to somebody if they're not doing mechanics and you are. So is that, 400k in damage? Like, probably not. That's not worth an orb run. So he's still probably a little better than I was, but let's take a look kind of at what he's doing here. So 3 Avenging Wraths. He also uses 3. And you can see here, he does a good job. He pops early. His becomes available at 2 minutes, but then he holds it and gets it in 1 more use. He's holding it for this burn phase here. Let's see. So I use a potion of battle potion of strength, which is better. He is using prolonged power, which is still good, and he's using it at the right time. But he would have been better off had he used a battle potion of strength. He would have been even higher. So now that we've looked at that, we can kind of take a look at Blood Mallet. This is kind of a general thing. Not all specs are supported, and even the specs that are supported, they'll make it very clear. Let's look at Prop Paladin. All charts are about dealing damage only, so don't think that Doom Shroom is going to be the best trinket for a Prop Paladin. It's only the best trinket when looking at damage. So beware of that if you're a tank. But a Ret Paladin, you can kind of look at what are the best trinkets, the ones that I should be looking to find based off the simulations. So Lion Strength, 1 from the World Boss, is pretty good. And be sure to look at the DPS breakdowns by item level, which are super important. So the top rated one is looking at something that would be item level 400. So never be afraid to scroll down, because almost everyone who can use it, all strength and agility classes, are using a Dark Moon deck Fathoms. Even though it's 355, it's comparable to item level 400 trinkets, which aren't even technically obtainable yet. I think the item cap is 395, so it's actually quite a bit better than some of these other ones. And you can look at like something. Okay, this is a trinket off the World Boss, I guess. So like even at 355, it's actually pretty strong. Bygone Bee Almanac, even at 355, it's actually pretty good. It's outclassing some of these top trinkets. So what else can we look at? We can look at Azerite. Laser Matrix and Archive are very similar. And what they're going to show you is for a 385 piece, when you're stacking 3 traits, Be very careful though because of reorigination array. The first trait is, you know, the vast majority of the benefit from either of these two. So looking at the chart, you know that you want either one archive or one laser matrix. But the DPS gain from having a second one of either is like 430 or 416. Whereas having one treacherous covenant is going to get you 583 DPS. So having the first one of treacherous covenant is better than having a second laser matrix or archive. There's a lot of traits like this. Like Light's Decree is even better. Having one Light's Decree is 737 DPS, but then stacking it is much less valuable. So always make sure you're looking for the green bar that sticks out the furthest. And that's probably something you want to look for. So Light's Decree would be something that I did not use but should have had or should have been looking for. And you can look at all kinds of stuff, like the racials are all really close together. Secondary distributions I didn't really look at, but like you can switch it from single target to AoE and you're going to get very different list of traits and trinkets. So this World Quest trinket is way better if you could get a high item level version of it in an AoE situation than other trinkets. So that's Blood Mallet. It's just, these are kind of something you can look at and say like, okay, I probably would want this PvP trinket if I could get a decent item level of it. It looks pretty strong for an AoE fight. Or really a patchwork fight too. Like that's just a good trinket overall. So that might be something to shoot for if you PvP. These PvP trinkets are good. And as always, those are general. What you want to do is actually sim your gear. So in raid bots, when you pull up the website, you get all these choices. The thing you want to look at is usually top gear. And this is for my rogue. So what you can do is just say like, I want to look at what's better, this helm or this helm. And I could put in, you know, what traits I think would be good, you know, guessing on those. And then you can put in different weapon enchants, different ring enchants, gems, anything you want to do. You can change your talents. So I might change to like single target as poison bomb. And you can, you know, compare it to what Crimson Tempest would do. And then you come down here, make sure you pick the correct number of reorigination array stacks that you want to sim for. For most of us, that's 10. This character never rated, so it's 0. And then you can do fight style, patchwork. You can do light movement. Cleave add, I think. Oh no, hectic add cleave would be AoE probably. There's a bunch of different choices here, but most people, to get an idea of, would be patchwork or light movement for a single target fight, and then one boss probably. And you can of course change the length of the fight to what it would actually be. So that fight was 6 minutes. I could have changed it to that. And then you just say find top gear. The website will put you in a queue, and eventually it'll come back and say like, all right, the Gravethorn hood is better than the Fairweather helm, and we picked these traits. And you can get a certain idea for yourself, and you can pick, you know, which trinkets would be better and sim them against each other. It's very quick and easy. Just make sure you don't go over the iteration limit unless you're a Patreon supporter. You can only have so many combinations of gear, so you can't just click everything. That's not going to work. The other place, once you can find your best gear for yourself, you can look at Warcraft logs, the overall front page here, and go to the content that we're running, which is Old Deer. You can click statistics. Make sure you pick the difficulty that you're actually going to be doing, because Mythic and Normal can be way different than Heroic. Make sure you have the right difficulty. Most people will pick 75th percentile. You know, if you're doing 75th percentile, that's very solid. So if you're like a world first guild, maybe you'll pick like 99th percentile. Maybe you'll pick 50th percentile if that's kind of where you are, but 75th percentile is generally what you want to shoot for. And you can look at player damage, and you can look at player healing. But the most important thing is, I was a paladin, a ret paladin, and let's go ahead and look at talents. So this gives you a chart of all the best talents that people are using and what percent people are using them. So talent row 1, you can just break it down like this. Most people are using Righteous Verdict because it's, you know, doing better than Zeal. For this one, I was using Blade of Wrath, which is actually the worst talent. I probably should be learning to play with Hammer of Wrath, which is by far better. I think Blade of Wrath is just easier to play. But if I could step it up, figure out how to use Hammer of Wrath, that would be better. Just beware, some of these are, like if it's a clear utility row, like what kind of CC you're using, it's not actually going to affect your DPS. You can skip the rows that are utility. Everybody uses Wake of Ashes, not even worth considering the others. This is a utility row. This is a utility row. And then here, Crusade versus Divine Inquisition versus Divine Purpose. Inquisition is actually better than Divine Purpose right now, even though most people are playing with Divine Purpose. So it could be a fight-to-fight thing. This is for all bosses, but if you're on Heroic Vectus, that's the one you're looking at. Okay, Crusade is really good for this one, so I'd probably want to pick Crusade. So you can pick whichever boss you want, and then you can look at your talents, you can look at Azerite powers for each tier. So Light's Decree is very popular, and it's very strong. This Imperium power seems good, and then Archive would be the third one. And then, you know, these other ones are what's actually being used in the fights. These are not simulations, these are actual statistics. This is like a non-DPS row, but you can see like what might be popular. Resounding Protection is super popular because it's very easy survivability gain. And lastly, you can check trinkets. Okay, there's no chart for trinkets, but you can see these PvP ones are very strong, but a lot of PvP players, or a lot of raiders, I guess, don't do PvP. So they're not very often used. But you can see Fathoms is a top trinket, and it's super easy. You just buy it. And then some of these, this is a raid trinket, this is a dungeon trinket. You can see where strong trinkets for this given fight are, and try and target those. So yeah, overall Fathoms was really good, and you could have it from day one. And in every list there's a Retribution Paladin, so this is like the average. These are all above average, these are all somewhat below average. So you can use all this information to kind of decide what trinkets, talents, and Azerite powers you're going to use for a given fight. based on what other people are using and what other people are having success with. Alright guys, that's all I wanted to cover. Thanks for watching.